Ever woken up with a goat nibbling your hair and a fog so thick it whispers your secrets back to you? Welcome to the underbelly of Grimestonia City, where dreams are as scarce as clean socks and the air tastes like regret. Buckle up, and if you dare, follow or subscribe to join this grimy journey through the soot-stained alleys of despair. Tonight, we embark on a journey through Grimestone, a city cloaked in perpetual twilight, where the sun seems to have taken a permanent vacation. This isn't the Grimestone of polished boots and afternoon teas. It's a place where the streets are paved with broken dreams and the scent of survival lingers in every corner. Before we delve deeper, dim your lights. Perhaps light a candle for ambiance, and prepare to traverse the murky depths of a world forgotten by time. Your eyes flutter open to the delightful sight of your brother's unwashed foot mere inches from your face, twitching as if dancing to the rhythm of a nightmare. Welcome to your humble abode, a single room that serves as bedroom, kitchen, and living space for 7 souls. The furniture consists of 1 bed, 2 chairs on the brink of collapse, and a rat named Cyril who has claimed squatter's rights. The walls are a patchwork of peeling paint and exposed brick, the ceiling leaks even on dry days, and the fireplace is purely decorative. The air is damp, the floorboards creak ominously, and your blanket is so thin it might as well be a suggestion. The pillow beneath your head is a lumpy concoction of straw and forgotten memories. Plumbing is a luxury you can only dream of. The bucket in the corner serves multiple purposes, none of them pleasant. Mornings are a symphony of groans, shuffles, and the occasional curse as everyone navigates the cramped space. Dressing under blankets to avoid the cold, taking turns at the wash basin, and the inevitable spill of the chamber pot are all part of the daily routine. Yet, amidst the chaos, this room is home. You know which floorboard creaks, which corner leaks, and which window pane rattles just before your neighbor yells about his missing boots. It's a place that prepares you for the harshness of the outside world by offering a taste of it within its 4 walls. Stepping outside, you're greeted by a wall of fog so dense it feels like walking through a damp woolen blanket. This isn't the romantic mist of novels. It's Grimestone's infamous gray gagger, a toxic blend of industrial smoke and natural mist that clings to your skin and seeps into your lungs. The sky is a uniform shade of gray. The street is gray, and even your thoughts feel gray. Visibility is a luxury, and every step is a gamble. The fog isn't just weather, it's a living entity that wraps around you, whispers in your ear, and dares you to find your way. The air is a complex cocktail of chimney soot, sewage vapor, horse manure, and last night's overcooked cabbage. If perfume makers bottled this, it would be called Eau de Urban Misery. It permeates everything: your clothes, your hair, and even your dreams. Coughing is the city's soundtrack, a chorus of hacks and wheezes that accompany you wherever you go. Doctors recommend moving to the countryside, but that's only an option if you own land and your own lungs. Breakfast in Grimestone is less of a meal and more of a ritual in lowered expectations. A crust of bread that could double as a roof tile, perhaps some porridge if the rats haven't gotten to the oats, and tea not because it's comforting, but because it's boiled, and therefore less likely to kill you. Milk is a gamble, sugar is a luxury, and butter is a myth. If you're lucky, the scent of freshly baked bread wafts from a nearby bakery. But that's someone else's breakfast, likely belonging to a man with a hat and a last name on his door. For the less fortunate, the workhouse offers a ladle of grayish, gruel-warm, edible, and that's about the kindest thing one can say. Street vendors peddle fried potatoes or meat pies of questionable origin, but hunger dulls the senses, and everything smells like hope. You eat quickly, standing in the cold, wrapped in your coat like a cloak of denial. There's no dining room, No soft morning musics, just the clatter of wheels, the shouts of vendors, and the distant sound of someone already yelling about stolen coal. With your stomach only half full and your spirit not at all, it's time to face the real monster, the streets of Grimestone. A sprawling, chaotic organism pulsing with smoke, mud, and misery. Every step is a calculated risk, and the street doesn't care if you're late for work or just trying to cross without being trampled. Sidewalks are a polite suggestion, and the main road is a battlefield of hoofbeats, wagon wheels, and ankle-deep sludge. Horse-drawn carts barrel past at terrifying speeds, and one false move could land you face down in a puddle that smells like something died in it because something probably did. If scrubbing someone else's socks for 16 hours sounds like your idea of luxury, congratulations, you're a woman in Grimestone. Welcome to the twisted tale of survival, where poverty doesn't discriminate, but it sure does pick favorites. Smash that follow or subscribe if you're ready for truth, grit, and just a sprinkle of soul-crushing realism. Imagine being Clara Braxton, who wakes every morning before the street lamps dim, hands already sore from dreams of yesterday's laundry. You're not cleaning your own linens, you're knee-deep in Lady Fenswick's petticoats, elbow-deep in Lord Hargrave's monogrammed misery. Bleach burns your skin, needles rob you of daylight. And when that grueling rhythm of chores breaks, there's always the alley. No sick days, no safety nets, just a brutal street symphony of screams, stares, and unpaid debts. Perhaps you're little Nellie Stokes, a chimney sprite squeezing through flues barely wide enough for hope, coughing up soot before your second breakfast, assuming you had a first. Maybe you're a mud picker down at low tide in the River Tannock, clawing through mud for rope, rusted nails, or bones that might sell for a halfpenny. You reek, you freeze. Dysentery's a freebie. And if life's extra cruel, you've landed in the Southmore Refuge Grimestone's answer to the workhouse, a grim parody of charity, where the only thing thinner than the gruel is your chance at joy. You're not there to live. You're there not to die too loud. Get sick? Too bad. Get hurt? You'll starve. There's no one taking notes. No sorry for your injury cards. Just a red-faced overseer barking at you to quit bleeding on the blankets. Complain? Not wise. There's always someone more desperate behind you, willing to work longer for less. Compassion? Out of stock. Your employment status is a coin toss in purgatory, technically alive, practically invisible. In Grimestone, jobs are less about money and more about distraction from the agony. You're technically employed, sure, but you're also technically collapsing. And then, there are the children. Childhood in this city isn't innocence, it's an apprenticeship in suffering. If you're under 4 feet tall, congratulations! You're now considered the right size for labor. Forget bedtime stories and toys. If you're not working by 5, your parents must be aristocrats or merciful. School? Optional. Work? Mandatory. Take young Titchy Tom, for example. Barely 6 and already scraping soot from chimneys like a flesh and bone feather duster. Get stuck? They jab you with poles. Stop moving? They assume you've joined the spirits and send in the next kid. Or Elsie Withers, a match girl. Her fingertips dyed with death. She dips sticks in phosphorus that slowly eats through her jaw. It glows at night, glows, and when it's gone, so is her job. Some dig the Tannock's banks for rubbish. Some sell news. Some chant about roasted nuts they'll never afford. Others sprint across filthy streets, dodging carriages and fists for a few pennies as errand boys and message girls. The luckiest work in factories, indoors, steady shifts. Just ignore the spinning blades and the kid next to you losing a finger. You learn quickly, or you don't learn at all. No goggles, no gloves, no apologies. And if you're an orphan, Well, you're barely a footnote. You work. You disappear. Maybe you're taken in for service. Maybe you vanish. Either way, you're cheap, quiet, and replaceable. Yet somehow, these soot-slicked kids survive. They make dolls from rags, whistle between coughs, steal laughs from each other like treasure. Because in Grindstone, even the children are expected to carry the crumbling empire on their crooked backs. If you thought the world was cruel to working men, try being a woman. You're on the clock forever, no breaks, no bouquets. Just cracked hands, split backs, and a society that demands your silence and your smile. If you're unmarried, congratulations, you're a domestic. That means rising before the sun to haul coal, polish hearthstones, and iron linens until your knuckles scream. Sit down only if someone says so. You eat last. You sleep in the attic. And if your employer decides to get friendly, you're expected to feel flattered. Apparently. Married, not much better. Now you're cleaning your own hovel, raising a gaggle of hungry kids, managing a family budget thinner than a hairpin, and sewing clothes by candlelight while praying your eyesight holds another year. Sometimes you boil and scrub laundry for wealthier women. Sometimes you stitch shirts in basements for 12 hours straight. It pays pennies. Bleed on the fabric, you're fired. Then there's the match factory. The infamous white glow. It starts with a toothache, ends with a collapsing jaw. Management blames chewing gum, not the poison, obviously. When all else fails, when you're widowed, orphaned, or just unlucky, the street becomes your last option. Bad work? Technically legal, politely ignored, socially destroyed. Maybe you'll scrape enough for rent. Maybe you'll vanish. Safety is what you carry in your pocket if you're lucky. Wool gloves and a prayer. Women in Grindstone are expected to be pure, perfect, and always productive. You're the moral center of your home, even if that home has no floorboards, no warmth, and no future. No paid leave. No protections. Just other women some kind, some not surviving beside you with bent backs and bitter smiles. And yet, somehow, they endure. They sing lullabies between sobs, sweep thresholds with broken brooms, mend children's socks while hiding their own tears, because someone has to, and no one else will. Now, let's say you've clawed through filth, skirted death, and landed work. Guess what? Grimestone's not done with you yet. Disease is everywhere. It sleeps with you, eats with you, rides the tram beside you. It hides in water, lingers in fog, and dances on your bread crust. Tuberculosis, or lung rot, as locals call it, starts with a cough and ends in a blood-splattered goodbye. Everyone knows someone with it. No one can afford the cure. Not that there really is one. Then there's cholera, waterborne roulette. One moment you're healthy, the next you're a vomiting wreck praying for death to miss your shift. Entire blocks go silent, pumps get chained up. Too late. Typhoid, scarlet fever, diphtheria. They all make rounds. Different symptoms, same ending. And if you're poor, they're punctual. Can't pay a doctor? Join the line for leaf teas, vinegar soaks, and whispered prayers. Laudanum. Now there's a wonder drug. A lovely blend of opium and alcohol sold over the counter. Got cramps? Laudanum. Grieving? Laudanum. Dying? Double dose. You'll still croak butt. You'll float to the afterlife with a smile. As for doctors, they're enthusiastic, if not always effective. Medicine's still a guessing game with a Latin accent. Surgery happens, sans gloves. Antiseptic, still a future concept. Honestly, the local barber might offer equal odds. Disease doesn't care about class, but it loves company. And 10 people in a room with no windows, no drains, and shared spoons? It's a microbial paradise. Survive long enough, and eventually you'll need a drink. But in Grimestone, water is a betrayal in liquid form. The river, Tannic, it's the city's vein, sewer, graveyard, and drinking trough. Picture it: dead fish, rotted turnips, chemical runoff, horse intestines, and the occasional floating cat, all swirling past Parliament. Then pour yourself a pint. Cheers. Don't worry, the water company says it's filtered. That means it's been stared at sternly, passed through gravel, and maybe strained through someone's sock. If you're poor, your tap is a communal pump 2 blocks away, shared by 100 neighbors in the local tannery. Cholera's dream buffet. You don't even know it's bad until you're curled on the floor regretting that second sip. And it's not just the drinking water, bath water, rinse water, dishwater. It's all part of the same terrifying ecosystem. Baths? Adorable idea. If you're lucky, you share a tin tub once a month. Same water for dishes, socks, and your cousin Frank. Just try not to think about it. If the river smells like it's planning a murder and the fog could file taxes, welcome back to Grimestone, where even your bathwater has a body count. Subscribe or follow if you haven't already. Trust me, you'll want company in this nightmare. You soak your blistered feet in the same basin you used to wash dishes, rinse clothes, and at some point, boil carrots. Hygiene in Grimestone is interpretive. And just when the stench from the River Tannic hit a level so toxic it made priests faint mid-sermon, the government finally acted. The year 1858. The event, the Great Stink. It was so apocalyptically foul that Parliament actually abandoned their building. Yes, change arrived, not through speeches or strategy, but through pure, unfiltered stench. Until then, your best options were boiling your water when you had fuel, or drinking the safe beverage of the age, beer. Not the rich, heady kind, lukewarm, weak, child-friendly beer that made you burp sadness. It fizzed slightly and was safer than the Tannic's fishy mouthwash. So yes, in Grimestone, death could come from a glass of water. The trick wasn't just avoiding thirst, it was avoiding where that thirst might take you. You've done the honest work. It paid in pennies and pain. The water could betray you. The factories would. The landlord doesn't accept dreams or debt as payment. So, what's left? Crime. And here, it's not just rebellion, it's a resume. You start small. Maybe you're a nipper-like fingers, fast feet. You blend in at the market, bump a distracted gentleman, and vanish with his coin purse before he even realizes he's been mugged by a child named Lyle in boots 2 sizes too big. Charles Dickens gave us Oliver Twist. Real life gave us prison cells and transportation ships. No musicals, just chains. If you're a woman, maybe you become a fence. You buy stolen goods, cloak yourself in shawls and smiles, and sell those wares in shadows. Or perhaps you run a Twilight House a drop point for pickpockets before the bobbies sniff too close. Feeling bold? Become a Costa swindler. Peddle bruised apples and milk so thin it's basically cloudy water. Sell it fast, vanish faster. Got nimble fingers? Try forgery, shell games, or the ever-popular 3-card Monte. Fast talk, faster legs. And if your courage outweighs your common sense, there's always burglary. Storehouses, merchant stalls, churches, even churches. Sometimes they have shiny things. Sometimes they have traps. And always, there's a constable with a club and no bedtime. Yes, Grimestone has police, but they're tired, underpaid, and often 2 steps behind. Bribe the right one, and suddenly you're not a suspect, you're a client. Some gangs in the city are so organized, they'd make military recruiters weep. Territories, code phrases, recruitment strategies, even pensions kind of. Then there are the resurrectionists. Body snatchers. Men who dig up fresh corpses to sell to anatomy schools. Disgusting? Sure. Profitable? Very. But get caught? You could be flogged, branded, jailed, or worse, shipped to New Lane, the penal colony where rats are the welcome committee. Still, crime feeds you, clothes you, and sometimes even gives you purpose. In Grimestone, morality is a luxury. Hunger is immediate, and crime isn't a last resort, it's a job. But let's say crime failed, or worse, you got sick. Maybe you caught the street chill. Maybe your leg was flattened by a delivery cart. Either way, it's doctor time. Good luck. Medicine in Grimestone is less about healing and more about experimental suffering with sharp tools. There are doctors, sure. Some even wear clean coats. But unless you've got pockets deeper than the Tannic, your first stop is the chemist. Their solution? Laudanum, miracle mixture of opium and alcohol that fixes everything by making you care less about dying. No money for laudanum. Try the barber surgeon. Yes, he cuts hair and limbs. His tools include a rusted saw, a grimy apron, and a bucket you scream into. No anesthesia, no antiseptic. Just a stick to bite and a whisper of regret. Hospitals? Please. They're overstuffed houses of despair. Ventilation is a myth. Instruments are wiped on aprons. Disease is believed to be caused by miasmas and moral impurity. Germ theory? That's future talk. For now, a sneeze in a ward can turn into a funeral in hours. Survive surgery? Infection might still win. A splinter becomes sepsis. A toothache turns into a grave. Giving birth? It's a gamble between cradle and coffin. Medical texts are thick with confidence and bursting with wrong guesses. Bleeding, blistering, and even mild electrocution are standard practice meant to balance the humors, which usually means draining your blood, hope, and wallet. There are a few progressive minds doctors who whisper about hand-washing and antiseptics. They're usually mocked. Because, of course, the idea that a gentleman's hands carry filth? Blasphemy? So most people wait. They sip herb tea. They light candles. They lie still. Because healing in Grimestone feels more like a coin flip than a guarantee. Night falls. The city doesn't sleep, it bristles. You might think the dark brings calm, but in Grimestone, twilight is a curtain that hides terrors. Cozy fireside tales? Forget it. The moment gas lamps flicker, the alleys become shadows, and the shadows aren't empty. Light barely cuts through the fog. Shapes move where shapes shouldn't. A hunched figure here, a silhouette there. Footsteps a coon too many. Alone at night, either you're brave or out of options. Coppers walk in pairs, truncheons swinging, but even they steer clear of certain corners. Because some streets aren't policed, they're owned. Criminals thrive in the dark. Footpads, slashers, whispering thieves. If you find yourself near Dock End or Hollowspire after dark, move quickly. Not because of phantoms, though the fog does play tricks, but because someone real might be watching. And if it's 1,888 and you're in the wrong alley, he might be holding a knife. Women? Their danger triples. Whispers come from shadows. Hands reach without warning. Some stalk, others strike. And the mist hides, everything screams, bodies, regrets. Even inside, peace is no promise. Tenements groan, rats skitter behind walls. Downstairs, a fight shatters glass, and maybe someone's spine. Sometimes a neighbor just disappears. No one asks. And fire? is patient. A knocked-over lamp, a reckless coal. Suddenly, flames are dancing across rafters. There are no alarms, no fire engines that arrive on time, just buckets, screams, and ash. If you must go out, carry a lantern. Hope the flame lasts and doesn't get seen. Because in Grimestone, night doesn't rest. It lurks, and the poor don't sleep. They huddle, they listen, and they pray that morning comes. Eventually, light returns her what passes for it. Morning isn't dawn. It's a slight shift in the haze, a hint of pale through the choking murk. The smog has rolled in again alive, insistent, thick with sorrow. It isn't just fog. It's a stew of coal, smoke, chimney soot, industrial ash, and despair. It wraps around buildings, slides under doors, nests in lungs like a ghost that's paid rent. You cough again. You never really stopped. No one has. It scratches your throat, settles on your clothes, clings to your eyelashes like paste. Coughing is just another city tune alongside church bells and the yells of someone furious about a stolen turnip. You wipe your window. The rag comes back black. Wash your hands. The water turns gray. Scrub your shirt. Still smells like burning hope. Even curtains are stiff with soot, sagging like tired soldiers. You think about airing out the room, then remember what's outside: more smoke, more stench, more sickness. Worst part? This is normal. The sun is a rumor. Children grow pale. Flowers on windowsills wheeze and die. Laundry hung outdoors returns dirtier. Soot-stained shirts with arsenic seasoning. Lovely. During the great smog-strewn fogs of infamy, you can't see your own feet. People vanish mid-step. Carriages crash. Boats collide. In 1873, the fog lasted 5 days. 5. Over 270 souls lost in one fogand. The city didn't even flinch. That's Grimestone. If this is your first time here, follow or subscribe, because you're about to walk deeper into a world where every breath could be your last. The poor felt it worst, of course. Their chimneys coughed up cheap, filthy coal smoke, their walls thin enough to whisper through, their lungs already weary. Children wheezed through winter like stray mutts, rattling with every inhale. If you reached adulthood without chronic coughing, bronchitis, or a mysterious dark phlegm that sounded like it crawled out of your chest, you were nothing short of a miracle. And still, you pressed on. You lit the fire, stepped outside, and pretended not to taste the air. Because in Grimestone, the smog never really leaves it, simply steps back to reload. By now, you'd think Victorian Grimestone was nothing but soot, screams, and sorrow, and mostly, you'd be right. But in the grayest corners, under soot-heavy skies, something unexpected flickers. Humanity. Small, stubborn, surprising. Kindness still lives here, though. You often have to squint through smoke to spot it. A half-loaf quietly passed from one neighbor to another, when payday's still a dream. A woman giving her last scrap of coin to a barefoot child with bleeding feet. No applause, no reward. Just a nod, maybe a rare smile. In the tenements, in the alleys, in the forgotten corners of the workhouses, people still look out for each other. Not always, not perfectly, but enough to rmind you that the city hasn't entirely swallowed their souls. A mother heating a brick and slipping it into her daughter's hands to fight the frost. An older chimney sweep teaching a rookie not to panic when the walls squeeze. A dying man giving his boots to someone with enough strength left to work. They aren't grand gestures. They're humble, quiet. But in a place where hope is rarer than soap, those gestures shine like gold. Even the pubs help. Loud, smelly, packed but essential. It's where hearts unclench, laughter bubbles, songs rise like steam. You might not eat meat, but you'll share stories over bitter beer. The blind fiddler on the corner, the penny-printed gossip hawkers, the kids dancing for pennies, they all form a patchwork of comfort. Proof that not everything here wants to devour you. Kindness in Grimestone isn't soft. It's practical. It's born of shared wounds. When the rich forget you, when the government fails you, when the smog chokes every prayer each other is all you have left. And somehow, despite everything, the filth, the fear, the Flames people still fall in love. They still cradle babies, sing lullabies, dream quietly under broken ceilings. Because if you can find tenderness in a gutter, a hand to hold in the cold, a crust of bread split with someone hungrier maybe, the city hasn't won. Not completely. So, after surviving 14 chapters of sludge, sickness, rats, and rotting teeth, it's time to ask, would you survive Grimestone? Let's be honest, probably not. This wasn't a city built for comfort. It was hammered into shape by coal smoke, broken backs, and the bodies of the forgotten. Every day was a brawl with your belly, with your boss, with the fog itself. Hunger chewed at you, cold clawed you, disease hunted you, and the world barely noticed. No soap, no painkillers, no switches for light, no brakes, no backups. Just another gray dawn, and the hope that maybe today you don't die before dinner. You'd miss things like flushing toilets, clean water, toothpaste. You'd wonder why no one flinches when you ask about vegetables. You'd miss shower so, how you'd miss showers. And yet people endured. Not because they were born different, but because they had no choice. They unionized. They marched. They raised loud children in louder streets. They wrote songs and stories. They made art with soot on bricks. They danced in pubs after 16-hour shifts. They laughed, even in the fog, even in the fever. They weren't just sad stories in textbooks. They were resilient, defiant, infuriatingly alive. You probably wouldn't last a single shift. And that's okay, because the people who did survive, they didn't do it for glory. They did it so we could wine today in warm houses with hot tea. They carried the weight of an empire barefoot, bleeding, and ignored. They built the bones of the modern world and were buried beneath it. So maybe we owe them more than sympathy. Maybe we owe them memory. Let's remember them not as soot-caked stats, but as humans who woke every day to impossible odds and survived anyway. And now, let's step from the soot of Grimestone into the bronze blaze of ancient Sparta. Gorgo was born into a world that didn't bend it broke things. Sparta was not Greece's temple-filled tourist spot. It was a war machine with rules carved in iron and hearts tougher than helmets. And Gorgo? She entered that fire not as a background character, but as a spark. She was the daughter of King Cleomenes Ione of Sparta's dual monarchs. Her birth was political. She wasn't a marriage pawn or decorative princess. In Sparta, women owned land, spoke publicly, were educated. A scandal to the rest of Greece. But Gorgo wasn't just a Spartan girl. She was the king's only child, and that meant destiny had its eye on her. As a girl, she probably listened in on war councils, learned to read body language as well as scrolls, and observed how diplomacy was a bloodless battleground. Her father? Brilliant, erratic, and slowly unraveling. That instability gave Gorgo a priceless education in power's price tag. There's one story famous, and sharp. She was 9, maybe 10. A foreign envoy tried to bribe her father into backing the Persian Empire. While the grown men whispered, Gorgo interrupted. "Father, you should send this man away, or he'll corrupt you." Not just bold, tactical. Her father listened. The envoy was ejected. Gorgo, barely 10, had already proven she had fangs. Before she was of marrying age, Gorgo showed she could read a room better than most rulers. She wasn't just born royal, she acted it. In Sparta, that meant clarity, courage, and the ability to slice through nonsense with a word. Her marriage to Leonidas wasn't a tale of roses and riddles, it was strategy and steel. Leonidas wasn't charming, he was carved from stone. Quiet, lethal, respected. Gorgo didn't want sweet. She wanted strength, and he wanted someone who understood what came next. As queen, she didn't vanish into embroidery and boredom. She didn't sit behind veils or whisper from curtains. Spartan queens stood beside kings, offered advice, and wielded influence. Leonidas knew he wasn't just marrying a woman, he was joining forces with one of Sparta's keenest minds. In private, they likely shared few words, but each one was a weapon. Gorgo, sharpened by a childhood in politics, likely helped Leonidas navigate threats from Persia, feuds at home, and the pressure of a kingdom on edge. Then came the moment, the invasion, Xerxes, and the path to Thermopylae. Leonidas prepared to lead 300 men to stall the Persian horde. Gorgo didn't cry, she didn't plead. She looked him in the eye and said, "Come back with your shielder on it." A sentence that would echo louder than swords. She wasn't being cruel, she was reminding him what it meant to be Spartan. To die well, if die he must. Leonidas went. He fell. Every last man with him. But Gorgo didn't crumble. She became more than a widow. She became the living legacy of that stand. While others built statues, Gorgo lived as a symbol, a leader, a survivor. Sparta was vulnerable after Thermopylae. The empire trembled. Allies squabbled. Persia loomed. But Gorgo held the center. She advised. She planned. She protected. Sources say she was consulted on diplomacy and domestic threats alike. Not in secret, not in shadows. Openly. Gorgoth queen who roared. Command. When Gorgo spoke, it wasn't with frills, it was with finality. And in Sparta, that was the sharpest kind of power. One famous story tells of a wooden tablet sent to the Spartans under strange circumstances. Its surface, smeared with wax, looked blank harmless even. Spartan officials turned it over and over, baffled. What message? What trick? They were warriors, not riddlers. But Gorgo, observing quietly, saw through it in a heartbeat. "Scrape the wax," she said. Beneath it, carved into the wood, was a warning. The Persians were coming. Hidden intelligence disguised in wax. She didn't just solve a diplomatic riddle, she may have saved an entire city-state. That moment was no fluke. Gorgo understood politics the way generals understand terrain. She saw how fragile Greece's unity was, how Persian silver slithered into city-states and turned friends into informants. While Athens danced with diplomacy and Thebes flirted with betrayal, Gorgo held the line. Her childhood instinct that corruption wears a kind face never faded. She advised caution, integrity, and unbending loyalty, even when it risked alliances. And Sparta listened. Because when Gorgo spoke, it wasn't as a woman, it was as a weapon. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She had clarity, sharpened by years watching madness consume her father and war take her husband. She knew what was at stake, not just land, but Sparta's soul. And when Leonidas fell, Gorgo rose. His shield may have been lost in the blood and dust of Thermopylae, but Gorgo became the city's armor. Not with sword or spear, but with judgment, counsel, and unshakable will. To grasp how radical Gorgo's influence was, you have to understand what being a woman in Sparta really meant. Unlike Athens, where women were cloistered, silent, and sidelined, Sparta raised its daughters to be fierce. Girls ran, wrestled, trained. They learned words, Not just weavings. They were expected to speak plainly, eat heartily, and think critically. Strength was survival, and mothers were seen as the first battalion of the Spartan army. But even among these warrior women, Gorgo stood apart. She wasn't just bold, she was brilliant. Known for her cutting wit and tactical mind, she once shut down a foreign noblewoman who asked, "Why are Spartan women the only ones who rule their men?" Gorgo didn't blink. "Because we are the only women who give birth to men." Not a boast, a battle cry. To raise a Spartan son wasn't just child-rearing, it was statecraft. Gorgo's son, Pleistarchus, would eventually ascend the throne, and while he was still a boy, it was Gorgo who likely sculpted his mind, taught him to weigh honor against ambition, and prepared him to wear a crown shaped by sacrifice. She never flaunted her influence. She didn't have to. Gorgo's power came not from titles, but from trust. She advised without arrogance, corrected without cruelty, and in doing so, she became a presence greater than most kings. While Sparta remained a double-helmed monarchy, with two kings ruling in tandem, it was often Gorgo's calm voice behind the curtain that steadied their course. She wasn't recorded as a ruler, but her fingerprints are on every moment of balance during Greece's most precarious war. Leonidas's death at Thermopylae wasn't just symbolistic, it was seismic. Greece reeled. The Persians were still advancing. The unity of the city-states was stretched thin. And into this uncertainty stepped Gorgonaut mourning, but moving. With her son still too young to reign alone, a regency was formed. Official records are vague, but you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone else more trusted than Gorgo in that moment. She may not have held a seal of office, but she held the confidence of those who mattered. The Jerusalem Spartan Council of Elders likely listened when she spoke, because she had seen what gold could do to integrity. She had seen how fear twisted courage into cowardice. The critical decisions, whether to defend the Peloponnese or aid in the naval battle of Salamis, whether to seek peace or hold the Linor-shaped rooms she may have stood in, quietly steering. She had learned from her father Cleomenes, whose ambitions scorched bridges. She had loved Leonidas, whose sacrifice became myth. Now she walked between those legacies, guiding Sparta with a steady hand, ensuring it neither rushed into ruin nor hesitated into defeat. She didn't command legions, she commanded legacy. And as years passed, her role shifted again. From queen to queen mother, from strategist to sentinel, she never faded, never retired into silence. Her presence remained, quiet and exacting, a living monument to Spartan endurance. Pleistarchus eventually took the throne, but he was no Leonidas. History remembers him as less fiery, less martial. But always behind him was Gorgo, the woman who raised him, shaped him, and whispered reminders of what sacrifice looked like. Her story isn't just preserved because of bloodline, it's preserved because of her brilliance. Ancient sources, including Herodotus, the so-called father of history, name her not as a footnote, but as a force. She appears in stories of diplomacy, espionage, and political caution. She wasn't a decoration in someone else's saga, she was the strategist in her own. In a world where most women were nameless, Gorgo etched her name into history with decisions, not jewels. Her mind razor sharp, morally rooted, was as vital to Sparta's survival as any battalion. She didn't wield a spear, she wielded policy. She didn't march into battle, she sent nations to war with a word. And Sparta loved her for it. A brutal place, a hard people. But when Gorgo spoke, they heard not weakness, but strength made elegant. She proved that in a land obsessed with silence, a well-timed word could ring louder than bronze. Her wit, too, was forged in Spartan iron. She didn't waste breath. She honed it. Her quotes echo through history, not as curiosities, but as clarion calls. When she warned her father of a Persian bribe, she didn't ask. She commanded. When she sent her husband to die for their people, she didn't weep. She ordered. Gorgo used her voice the way Sparta used soldiers, sparingly, strategically, and with devastating effect. When warnings came concealed in wax, it wasn't a general or elder who unraveled the message, it was Gorgo. Without missing a beat, she cracked the code and altered the fate of Sparta. Words were her weapons, and history would learn to duck. Gorgo didn't merely speak, she wielded language with the precision of a surgeon and the force of a commander. In a realm where blades ruled and men marched, she proved intellect could draw just as much blood. Her speech wasn't laced with flattery or decorated with metaphors. Every sentence had a spine. Every reply felt final. In a society that honored silence, Gorgo's words rang out with terrifying clarity. Not because they were loud, but because they were real. She didn't bluff. She didn't placate. She understood the weight of her voice and used it like a sword really, but with deadly purpose. She didn't mourn publicly. She didn't soften with age. She grew sharper. While most queens are remembered for their lineage, Gorgo was remembered for her lines, and she meant every one of them. In Sparta, that wasn't just impressive, it was sacred. As the years wore on, Sparta did not mellow. While other Greek cities evolved into havens of art and learning, Sparta remained a fortress of old, values disciplined, insular, unchanging. Gorgo stood among its marble and bronze like a living relic, a human embodiment of Sparta's hard edges and harder truths. Leonidas' sacrifice was never forgotten. It defined a generation, and Gorgo, left behind to carry the cost, saw the long game unfold. Sparta won glory but earned rivals. Athens, swollen with democracy and ambition, shifted from friend to future enemy. The seeds of the Peloponnesian War were sprouting, and Gorgo, watching her son Pleistarchus step into manhood and leadership, likely saw what was coming. Sparta's greatest strength-unyielding code, martial pride, was becoming its greatest blind spot. While Athens innovated, Sparta clung. Where others adapted, Sparta braced. But Gorgo didn't rage at the change. She accepted it with the same clarity she always had. Wars weren't always fought with spears. She'd lived through battles of whispers, betrayals, bribes, and shifting borders. She knew that survival didn't always mean winning it, sometimes meant enduring. By now, Gorgo wasn't just a widow. She wasn't just a queen mother. She was Sparta's echo and its edge. A breathing memory of Leonidas' era, a standard against which other leaders were measured. Her final days are unrecorded. No scroll describes her last breath, but there's no reason to believe she met death with anything less than calm, practiced grace. She had seen kings fall, cities burn, gods fail. She had walked through fire in silence. She didn't need marble to immortalize her. Her legacy was already chiseled in policy and preserved in memory. She had ruled without ruling, commanded without title, changed a city that forbade softness even in its kings. If Gorgo ever wept, she did it in solitude. If she hoped, she did it quietly. But Sparta didn't measure greatness in emotion, it measured it in action. And her story, already sealed in bronze and blood. She didn't need poems written in her name. Her name was the poem. Gorgo of Sparta, daughter of a king, wife of a legend, and voice of a nation that feared no death but dishonor. She didn't trail behind her men. She stood beside them. And history has never been able to look away. Where most queens were stories wrapped in tragedy, Gorgo was a chapter of triumph. Historians still marvel that her name appears again and again in the works of Herodotus, not as a muse or a mystery but as a force. In a time that buried women in footnotes, Gorgo sliced through history's silence like a spear through a shield. What makes her legacy monumental isn't what she ruled, it's how she moved. She advised, she outwitted, she endured, she raised a king, she shaped a war, and she outlasted them all. Her most quoted words, "Come back with your shield or on it," aren't a slogan. They're an epitaph. A queen sending her husband to glory or death with 6 words that still shake the spine. They've been carved, echoed, and even commercialized, but they still hold their original chill. They weren't romantic, they were orders. Gorgo is one of the rare women of the ancient world, remembered not for her looks or scandals, but for her intellect. She was a mind too sharp to ignore, and a presence too firm to forget. In Sparta's cold fire, she didn't melt. She forged her place. She wasn't a shadow to kings, she was a kingmaker. And for every strategist overlooked, every voice ignored, every woman told to soften Gorgo, remains proof that power doesn't always march. Sometimes it sits still and watches and waits for the moment to speak. Because in the end, Gorgo proved this. Strength isn't always loud, and real power doesn't always wear a crown. From the war-worn stone of Sparta, we now shift eastward into the sun-scorched plains of Jordan, where ruins whisper of a different kind of power. In the endless hush of Jordan's desert, where the sky burns and the wind forgets to blow, rise structures that seem like hallucinations, grand walls, domed roofs, carvings half erased by time. They're called desert castles, though castle is a misnomer. These weren't forts, they were statements. Erected in the 7th and 8th centuries during the Umayyad Caliphate, these buildings were not meant to hold off invaders, they were crafted to impress. They were luxury retreats, hunting lodges, seasonal palaces. And unlike anything the early Islamic world had seen, they were designed not to hide from the desert, but to conquer it through presence. To understand them, you must understand the Umayyads, rulers born from tribal roots who now controlled an empire that stretched from Spain to Central Asia. Their capital in Damascus pulsed with power. But they never forgot the desert it was home, myth, crucible. And so they returned to it not to escape the city, but to expand civilization into its silence. The desert castles became expressions of wealth, control, and cosmopolitan pride. They weren't randomly placed. Many sat beside ancient trade routes or seasonal springs, turning barren lands into stations of rest, diplomacy, or escape. Yet their architecture reveals more than practicality. These were palaces of paradox Roman arches beside Islamic geometry, Persian bathhouses under Byzantine frescoes. At Qusair Amra, images of musicians, nude bathers, and a cosmic portrait of the 6 kings, Byzantium, Persia, Ethiopia, all bowing to the Umayyad send a clear message. We are not just rulers, we are the future. Frescoes shimmered in pigment, stonework danced with floral motifs, mosaics blended east and west in patterns of control and beauty. The Umayyads were staging a performance. The desert was their theater. Their audience? Allies, rivals, and generations yet unborn. These castles weren't hidden, they announced. In the most inhospitable corners, the Umayyads made oases of power. In places like Qasr al-Mushara, you can still trace the outlines of floral arabesques beside classical Kalamsa conversation in stone between civilizations. And though many of these castles now lie in ruin, half swallowed by shifting sands, their message still echoes. We ruled even the desert. Of all the desert marvels scattered across the Jordanian plains, none seduces the imagination quite like Qusair Orum. At first glance, it's nothing just a squat stone block, half submerged in golden silence, barely visible in the vast hush of sand and sky. But step inside and the world changes. Beyond those thick stone walls lies a kaleidoscope of color, a defiance of the arid wasteland beyond. Every surface breathes with stories painted secrets, swirling hues, and imagery untouched by the desert wind for over 13 centuries. Constructed in the early 700 SCE, Qusair Orum is believed to have been commissioned by Caliph al-Walidai, or one of his inner circle. It wasn't a fortress or a temple. It was something stranger and more luxurious, a spa, a political retreat, a mirror for Umayyad ambition. With its domed audience chamber, bathhouse rooms, and celestial ceiling that maps the stars, it was part observatory, part pleasure dome, a constellation hall hidden in the sands. But the soul of Qusair Orum is in its frescoes. They wrap the walls in vivid contradiction images that challenge modern expectations of early Islamic art. There are dancing figures, cups of wine, musicians mid-strum, hunters mid-chase, and mythic beings like Hercules. There's a ceiling alive with zodiac signs and planetary spirits. And then there's the Six Kings Murala, symbolic flex showing foreign rulers bowing in submission before the Umayyads, framed in pigment and pride. It's visual propaganda on plaster, asserting dominance not with swords, but with symbols. These depictions have baffled and intrigued scholars for decades. Islamic art is often associated with aniconism, the absence of human and animal images. Yet Qusair Orum challenges that narrative. It shows a world where religion and secular indulgence mingled freely, where science, pleasure, and power shared space under painted stars. Time has not been kind. Wind, sand, and silence have faded many of the images, the colors dulled, but restoration has salvaged fragments of the glory. Today, Qusair Orum is protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Not a ruin, but a time capsule, its walls echoing with laughter, politics, and stargazing rituals lost to centuries. It's not just a building, it's a painted dream, the desert's whisper of elegance and empire. Not far away, Qasr al-Haran rises like a mirage. A massive limestone box on the horizon, stern and symmetrical. At first glance, it looks like a fortress arrow slits, looming walls, an absence of doors on three sides. You expect soldiers, but its story unfolds differently. Built around the same era as Qusair Orum, al-Haranah's purpose is a mystery still debated. Despite its military appearance, it holds no real defense, has no towers, no garrison evidence, no water source. Its narrow slits let in light, not arrows. What kind of fortress can't fight? Historians now believe it was a caravanserai, a roadside lodge for travelers, merchants, and diplomats navigating the dusty arteries of the empire. 60 or so rooms, arranged in a tidy grid over 2 levels, surrounded a central courtyard. It could house guests, animals, and negotiations alike. It may have been a political theatera meeting space, where Umayyad officials hosted tribal leaders, negotiated alliances, or simply reminded the desert who ruled it. Inside, subtle beauty reveals itself. Vaulted ceilings, carved niches, traces of faded plaster. The second-floor rooms feel intimate, yet grand, perfect for discreet discussions and quiet deals. Graffiti carved into the stone hints at literate guests from across regions, messages in multiple languages etched into its heart. Qasr al-Haranah was more salon than stronghold. A place where diplomacy wore the mask of defense. In an era of shifting borders and fragile authority, its dual identity was the point. Visitors today walk its corridors in contemplative silence. They stare through those narrow slits and imagine the conversations that once echoed treaties, betrayals, jokes over tea. It's a building that whispers, never shouts, a castle not of war, but of watchful power. Then there is Qasr al-Mashata, now a ruin but still radiant in ambition. Located just south of modern Amman, it was never completed. Yet even in its unfinished state, it astonishes. Among the desert castles, it may be the most sophisticated in design. Its remains speak of grandeur paused mid-sentence. The palace's south-facing facade was its masterpiece, a wall of intricate carvings where geometry, flora, and stylized beasts danced across limestone. A mosaic of artistic traditions, Byzantine flourishes, Persian elegance, and Islamic balance. A symbolic blend of the worlds the Umayyads had conquered, inherited, and redefined. Ironically, most of that facade isn't in Jordan anymore. In the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire gifted it to Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm II. Today, much of it resides in Berlin's Pergamon Museum, a fragment of Middle Eastern magnificence repatriated to a European museum. But even in its reduced form, the palace commands awe. You can still trace the symmetrical layout, the grand courtyard, the hint of an entrance meant to dazzle. Scholars agree it was planned as a winter palacia retreat and a royal assertion. It was meant to impress tribal emissaries, foreign dignitaries, maybe even rival royals. Within its halls would have stood audience chambers, residential wings, prayer space halls surrounded by deliberate design and opulent scale. But the vision was interrupted. Some say Caliph al-Walid II's death halted the project. Others cite shifting politics or structural setbacks. Whatever the cause, Qasr al-Mashata was left suspended a dream, unbuilt, but not forgotten. Its stones, even in silence, hum with intent. A reminder that the Umayyads weren't just rulers, they were artists, architects, dreamers. Even failure here was magnificent. And throughout these castles, Amra, Harana, Mashatoan feature appears again and again: the hammam. A public bathhouse in the middle of the desert? It may seem odd, but for the Umayyads, hammams were more than practical. They were philosophical, political, cultural. Bathhouses weren't just for washing. They were for meetings, meditation, and moonlight soaking. In a world where water meant life, bathing in heated, perfumed spaces was a symbol of civilization itself. Take Qusayr Orum. Again beneath its frescoed ceilings is a fully functioning Roman-style bath system. Changing rooms, warm chambers, hot steam rooms, and even underfloor heating. Ancient Roman tech, Islamic intent. These weren't borrowed luxuries, they were inherited, adapted, and elevated. Proof that empire wasn't just about borders, it was about ideas. Even in desolate dunes, the Umayyads brought comfort, class, and cosmos into stone. Their palaces weren't accidental. They were deliberate stagecraft manifestos in masonry. And the bathhouses? Those were the closing acts where politics washed off its dust and the desert exhaled. It wasn't just about bathing, it was about bending the will of nature. In the searing vastness of the Jordanian desert, the Umayyads didn't just survive. They turned scarcity into ceremony. Steam became their signature, and the Hamamtha Desert Bathhouse was their triumph. These weren't merely spaces for cleanliness, they were rooms of ritual. Here, cloaked in vapor, caliphs and courtiers could unwind, host tribal envoys, or negotiate power far from Damascus's political tension. Privacy met pageantry, intimacy wrapped in ritual. And then there was the art. Along the sweat-slick walls of these hammams, images emerged like dreams through the mist zodiac signs. Planets, bathing women, hunters frozen mid-stride, musicians lost in song. In Kusire Aurum, the dome above the hot room becomes a galaxy, a hand-painted planetarium. Stars swirl overhead while water hisses below. It wasn't just luxury, it was philosophy. The Umayyads didn't reject pleasure, they refined it. In the middle of a landscape where life clawed for survival, the act of bathing became a statement. We are not just here, we reign here. This embrace of elegance wasn't indulgence, it was intelligence. Where deserts whispered desolation, the Caliphate answered with art, heat, and constellation-covered ceilings. To sit in one of these baths was to be reminded, civilization doesn't hit, it arrives in style. And in these spaces, they didn't just wash bodies, they mapped the cosmos. One of the most haunting and overlooked wonders of these desert retreats is their orientation to the stars. In an era before compasses or code, the night sky was scripture and compass alike, and the Umayyads were stargazers in stone. At Kusire Aurum, the dome in the bathhouse reveals an ancient sky-painted planets, zodiac figures, constellations swirling above. It wasn't decorative, it was deliberate. An inherited knowledge from Byzantines and Persians fused with Islamic vision. Here, astronomy wasn't a hobby, it was identity. The heavens weren't just admired, they were mirrored. This celestial imagery didn't just announce sophistication, it reflected something deeper, a belief that power on Earth should echo the harmony of the stars. A ruler aligned with the cosmos was more than legitimate, he was divine. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, the sky was unspoiled. No city lights, no noise, just blackness pierced by thousands of stars. These palaces, with their open-air courtyards and domes, became natural observatories, spaces for charting calendars, navigating the unknown, or simply breathing in the infinite. And it's important to remember early, Islam didn't war with science, it nourished it. The Umayyads laid the foundation for what would bloom into the Islamic Golden Age. These castles weren't just places of rest. They were waypoints in a greater intellectual map. With stone and pigment, they carved themselves between earth and sky caliphs, with sand on their boots and stars in their eyes. Still, one question lingers like the desert heat. Why here? Why build such ornate palaces so far from everything? The answer isn't just in topography, it's in psychology. To the Umayyads, the desert wasn't exile. It was inheritance. Their tribal blood knew its rhythms, feared its silence, and respected its laws. Building out here wasn't defiance, it was a return. These weren't outposts, they were sanctuaries, retreats from court life, but also power plays. Constructing splendor in desolation was a performance. It said, "Look what we can do." These castles transformed barren lands into royal ground. They planted the flag of civilization in places where even shrubs hesitated. Isolation brought advantage, diplomacy in silence, meetings without spies, gifts exchanged beneath painted ceilings instead of palace walls. Here, tribal leaders were wooed not just with words, but with warm water and carved domes. And the geography wasn't always random. Some of these fortresses stood near seasonal wells, ancient trade paths, or crossroads critical to Bedouin tribes. They were more than pretty, they were practical. Strategically placed chess pieces in the game of empire. Visually, too, they stunned. The nothingness of the desert amplified their detail. Against the blank canvas of sand, every arch, every mosaic, every carved stone screamed louder. They weren't hidden, they were framed. Their remoteness wasn't a flaw, it was the message. Each desert castle whispered the same creed. Beauty does not wait for permission. Power does not seek convenience. culture can bloom even here. Today, these structures no longer echo with footsteps of emirs, astrologers, or emissaries, but they remain. Quiet sentinels of an empire that once dared to paint its legacy across oblivion. Modern Jordan has reclaimed these forgotten jewels. They're no longer ghost towns, they're icons. Qusayr Aram, Qasr al-Harana, Qasr al-Mishatame's once fading into sand now shine as cultural monuments. Qusayr Aram, in particular, proudly carries the title of UNESCO World Heritage Site. Preservation teams work tirelessly to stabilize crumbling frescoes, clear windswept debris, and shield ancient designs from the slow rot of time. But nature is relentless. The desert's breath-dry, searing, insistent continues to test their resolve. Sunday, wind, and sand-eternal enemies of art gnaw at the stones. And yet, the effort persists, because these aren't just walls, they're memories in mineral form. For today's visitors, the desert castles provoke a-winged questions. Why here? What does this say about power, about artistry, about vision? To walk through Qusayr Aram's constellation chamber, or peer from Qasr Harana's arrow-thin windows, is not to witness ruin, it's to witness survival. These structures don't just tell stories, they challenge assumptions about Islam, about empire, about what can grow in emptiness. They reveal an early Islamic world alive with contrast, tribal and imperial, ascetic and luxurious, grounded and starbound. A world that pulled influence from east and west, yet remained uniquely itself. Now, they stand alone again, surrounded by the silence they were born into. But this time, we are listening. These castles no longer shout, they whisper. Of a time when desert wind carried the scent of cedar, the sound of lutes, and the glint of starlight on domed stone, when the desert wasn't a void but a stage. And against all odds, the performance still plays. Like a breath on the face of the sky, the moon grew and shrank with haunting precision, appearing, fading, vanishing until early humans began to see in its rhythm a pattern, a language. Before they had clocks or calendars, they had this silver ghost in the night, counting silently towards something greater. The moon became their first reliable marker of time. A full cycle, roughly 29.5 days, meant more than a pretty light overhead. It became a pulse for life itself, a signal to hunt, to gather, to move, to prepare. The very word month is born from the moon. But that wasn't the only sign. Shadows crept differently as the year advanced. The sun rose and set in shifting places along the horizon. Stars vanished and returned with the seasons. And slowly, over generations, humans didn't just observe the sky, they began to understand it. And more importantly, to preserve that knowledge. It wasn't just practical, it was sacred. Early people scratched tallies into antlers, painted crescents on cave walls, and dragged great stones into alignment with the sun's journey. These weren't idle marks, they were the first calendars. The earliest we know are 30,000 years old, bone fragments etched with lunar counts, possibly tracking menstruation, fertility, or migration. The cycles of the moon and of life, carved in parallel. Time wasn't abstract. It breathed. It spoke. It told them when to move, when to rest, when to hope. Before time had numbers, it had purpose. And before it had tools, it had myths. The moon wasn't a rock, it was a god, a teacher, a calendar in orbit. Its phases offered comfort, constancy. A waning crescent meant harvest. A full moon meant ritual. Across continents, nomadic tribes counted moons, not weeks or years. And in those countings, the idea of a calendar was born. Archaeologists have found ancient bones and stones carefully notched in repeating patterns. These are humanity's first ledgers of time. The Ashango bone from Central Africa, for example, holds markings believed to reflect a lunar calendar, possibly used for fertility, possibly for food. Either way, it was survival through calculation. Why the moon? Because it was bold. It changed visibly every few days. Unlike the sun or stars, it gave a tangible sense of passing. A month, in essence, became a full moon cycle. 12 moons roughly filled a year, not perfectly, but closely enough for early cultures to rely on it. Eventually, that gap between moon cycles and solar years created problems. Crops didn't wait for the full moon, and so as agriculture took root, the moon's rule began to share the stage with the sun. The sun moved more subtly. It rose and set differently depending on the time of year. Those shifts, light but steady, were clues, and those who watched closely saw that the sun didn't just move, it returned. At certain key moments, the solstices and equinoxes it paused, pivoted. These became anchors, the longest and shortest days, the balance points between night and day. And ancient people began to mark them not with pencils, but with stone. The most iconic example? Stonehenge. While its purpose is still debated, its alignment with the summer and winter solstices is precise. On those days, the sun slips perfectly between two stones, casting shadows that once fell with divine weight. And this wasn't an isolated innovation. In Egypt's Nubian desert stands Nabta Playa, a stone circle with solar alignment predating Stonehenge. In the American Southwest, the Chacoan people etched spirals into cliffs, marking sunlight's exact touch on solstices. At Machu Picchu, windows in sacred temples framed the rising sun with mathematical grace. These structures weren't architecture, they were instruments, solar calendars embedded in rock. Because for early humans, the sun wasn't just a torch in the sky, it was sacred. Its return after long winter nights became cause for celebration. Rebirth, hope, continuity. It gave structure to the moon's motion. Cultures across the globe revered solar deities. Ra in Egypt, Surya in India, Inti in the Andes. Their power wasn't just celestial, it was political. Solar events determined when kings were crowned, when fields were sown, when gods were honored. The sun taught patience. The moon taught rhythm. Together, they birthed the calendar not as numbers in rows, but as stories, rituals, and survival guides. And so humans began building their lives around the sky. But they didn't just track time, they gave it soul. Calendars became sacred, time became divine. In Mesopotamia, priests climbed ziggurats to read the stars not for science, but for meaning. They tracked Jupiter and Venus like omens, divided time into 7-day weeks and 360-day years, and crafted a base 60 system that still shapes how we count minutes and angles today. Not to save time, but to sanctify it. In Egypt, the calendar wrapped around the Nile, and the rising of Sirius, brightest star in the sky. Its heliacal rising coincided with the Nile's flooding, a moment that brought life to the land. This marked the Egyptian New Year celebration of water, fertility, and cosmic grace. And far to the west, the Maya created a system so intricate it feels futuristic even now. They didn't see time as linear, but as a spinning cycle. That Solkin calendar tracked a 260-day sacred rhythm. The Hab followed the 365-day solar year. Together, they wove a cosmic clock where every day had a name, a meaning, a spirit. They didn't mark time, they danced with it. In Maya civilization, time wasn't something to survive, it was something to honor, to fear, to align with. Kings weren't crowned when it was convenient. They waited for the heavens to give permission. Through all this, ancient people showed something stunning. They didn't just measure time, they lived it. They carved it in stone, painted it on cave walls, followed it across oceans of sand. The sky wasn't distant, was home. And so, when you look at the stars tonight, or see the moon rise over rooftops, remember long before time was counted, it was felt. Before clocks ticked, the earth turned, and humans, wrapped in fur and firelight, learned to follow. Not with watches, but with wonder. To ignore the calendar was to flirt with chaos not just in the fields, but in the firmament. In ancient minds, keeping time wasn't about control over days, it was control over meaning. A misaligned calendar didn't just disrupt the harvest, it disrupted harmony. Sacred time shaped the rhythm of civilization. The calendar, stitched from moonlight, sunlight, and starlight, became a bridge between the mortal and the divine. And as civilizations grew more complex, so too did their obsession with organizing the heavens into earthly order. The concept of a year of full lap around the sun slowly crystallized, but grasping that it spanned 365.25 days wasn't easy. It required generations of skywatching, countless errors, and a stubborn refusal to accept cosmic drift. Early timekeepers leaned on the moon. 12 full cycles gave them 354 days, nearly 2 weeks shy of the solar year. That small gap, it snowballed. Festivals slipped into the wrong seasons. Planting rituals landed in frost. Spring feasts arrived in snow. Civilizations had to choose, honor the moon or chase the sun. The Babylonians tried to have both. They clung to lunar months, but added a bonus month every few years to keep things on track. Egypt took a bolder, leap-ditching lunar timing entirely, and introducing a solar calendar. 365 days, 12 months of 30, and 5 extra days tacked on like divine footnotes. It was revolutionary and astonishingly precise for its time. Still, that sneaky quarter-day lag persisted. Over centuries, even Egypt's calendar drifted. New Year parades crept forward. Spring rituals slipped into summer. Then came the Romans, inheriting chaos and ambition in equal parts. Their early calendar was a patchwork of lunar cycles, priestly edits, and political tinkering. Months could be added or moved to favor campaigns or delay taxes. The result? Total chronological anarchy. Until Julius Caesar. In 45 BCE, with the help of Alexandrian astronomer Sosigenes, Caesar unveiled the Julian calendar. 365 days, with a leap day every 4 years to mop up the surplus quarter day. It was clean, efficient, and empire-sized. Finally, the year had teeth. It could be ruled and taxed. Suddenly, the calendar wasn't just about crops. It was about control, administration, law, war, religion. The year gave civilization its pulse. And once we had that, we began to slice it finer. First came months. Born from lunar roots, months originally tracked the moon's 29.5-day cycles, but solar calendars warped that precision. So cultures twisted months to fit new system-satting days, dropping others, adjusting for the sky's whims. The Romans gave us the blueprint we still use. Martius, March, for Mars. September, the 7th month, originally. July for Julius. August for Augustus. Even the month lengths bore ego. Augustus allegedly added a day to ensure his month was equal to Caesar's eye. Then came the week, a stranger invention. Unlike months or years, the 7-day week has no natural cycle. It emerged from mysticism, not astronomy. The Babylonians adored the number 7, assigning each day to a visible celestial body, the sun, moon, and 5 known planets. This cosmic rhythm caught on, spreading westward. The Jews sanctified it. In Genesis, creation spanned 6 days, followed by divine rest. That pattern embedded itself in faith, passed into Christianity, and later into Islam. By the 1st century CE, even the Romans had adopted it. The week wasn't logical, it was spiritual. And somehow, it stuck. Even today, it governs everything from work to worship. It's our most persistent human rhythm. Together, months and weeks gave time a heartbeat. Days weren't just slipping by. They marched. They repeated. They formed rituals work. Rest. Return. And soon, whoever owned the calendar owned more than time, they owned truth. Calendars became instruments of power. Emperors, priests, kings, and councils used them not only to organize life, but to define it. When debts were owed, when taxes hit, when armies moved, when gods expected prayer. Whoever set the calendar set the law. Julius Caesar didn't just fix time, he conquered it. His Julian calendar let Rome synchronize across continents, and when he named July after himself, time itself became propaganda. Augustus followed with August. Equal days, equal glory. Even time had politics. In China, dynasties wrote time into their mandates. Each emperor's reign could trigger a new calendar cycle. The Chinese lunisolar calendar wasn't just a tool, it was a sacred seal. A heavenly endorsement of the ruler's legitimacy. To keep a calendar was to keep cosmic balance. In the Islamic world, time began not with a season, but a story. The Hijri calendar, launched in the 7th century CE under Caliph Umar, marked the Prophet Muhammad's migration from Mecca to Medina. It was purely lunar, letting religious events float through seasons, a symbol of unity across climates, nations, and centuries. And in Europe, time was baptized. The Christian Church aligned saints' days with pagan festivals to ease conversion. Holy calendars absorbed local rhythms, replacing old gods with new icons. The calendar told people not just when to live, but how. And then it slipped again. By the 16th century, the Julian calendar had drifted off course. Its overgenerous leap year rule had accumulated an 11-minute error per year. Tiny, insignificant. Until centuries passed and the spring equinox landed on the 10th of March instead of the 21st. For the Catholic Church, this was no minor glitch. Easter, its most sacred feast, depended on that date. The rhythm of resurrection was out of sync. So in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII ordered a radical reset. 10 days vanished. The 4th of October was followed by the 15th of October. Just like that, time was rewritten. Clocks didn't move forward. The calendar did. His astronomers also updated the leap year rules. A leap year would occur every 4 years unless divisible by 100, but still allowed if divisible by 400. It was elegant, almost surgical. The Gregorian calendar, with these tweaks, hugged the solar year so closely it would take millennia to drift. Still, not everyone clapped. Protestant and Orthodox nations resisted the papal decree. England didn't adopt it until 1752. Russia waited even longer. For a time, Europe couldn't even agree what day it was. And yet, over time, the Gregorian calendar triumphed, not by force, but by necessity. It worked. It fit. It became the calendar of commerce, diplomacy, and modernity. The rhythm of Caesar, the edits of a pope, the gaze of countless sky watchers woven into one silent pulse that still beats beneath our days. In the end, to master the calendar was to master meaning. Time isn't neutral. It never was. It's a story, a rhythm, a spell, and someone always writes it.